Every chemical in agriculture is a fossil fuel chemical. Fertilizers, pesticides, the raw material for all of them. 50% of teenagers of Australia were depressed. And all of them had zinc deficiency. All traditional crops have higher nutrition than all the so-called modern varieties. Mr. Bill Gates, as you might have noticed, I'm very fond of him. How did this billionaire become the government we never elected? How is he governing us? In every field, whether it's health or education. The food miles, why should our dals not be coming from India and instead be glyphosate sprayed, fake dal from Canada, in the dal that you're exporting? Loaded. It's a cancer drug. 5% of what the consumer pays reaches the farmer in long-distance supply chains. Nothing is going to the farmer, but everything is going out of the farmer's pocket. India is an Aranya Sanskrit, that we learned everything from the forest and from nature. And everywhere, you have the values that are being created, make young people think that home is not where they belong. They have to become refugees, run to Hyderabad from the villages, from Hyderabad, United States, and see children make their home here is also really the regeneration of culture, because it cannot be the effort of a one generation. The fact that for 10,000 years in India, we could farm and our farming systems sustain themselves and sustain the people. Or that in Australia, for 60,000, now they're saying 65,000. They described the Australian Aboriginal people as bushmen. But now they're saying this was the biggest garden in the world. They were gardeners and they were farming. But when Captain Cook arrived, he says, but I don't see any proof of civilization because I see no destruction. And that is the crisis of colonialism. It defines civilization as the power to destroy. And all traditional cultures define civilization as the power to make permanent. Not static. Big difference between stagnant and static and not changing, and permanent as dynamic change that maintains the core. That's how a plant evolves, No two leaves will be identical, the tree. No two generations will be absolutely identical. But the basic pattern is reproduced. They don't go crazy. And since I've been working ever since the GMO issue started, I started to work with scientists too. I ran away from the only biology class I was supposed to attend. They were going to chop up cockroaches. And I don't like cockroaches and I don't like chopping up things. So I said, no, this is not for me. And, I dedicated myself to study physics even when I was in schools that didn't teach physics. I had chosen physics as my vocation. I'd chosen quantum theory as my life's dedication. How did I end up spending now 40 years of my life understanding agriculture and practicing an agriculture that regenerates the earth and is non-violent? Many of you are young. You are born after 1984. Many of you are not from this country. But how many of you remember 1984? Just tell me. What's 1984 for you? At least some of you. Did you learn it in school or you learned it through seeking? Story books, not textbooks. So 1984, of course, is also, I really feel, one of the most important books in our times, 1984. Orwell's 1984. And for those who don't know, where Orwell was born? His parents shipped him to Burma afterwards. But I did the Freedom Yatra for 100 years of the Champaran Satyagraha, which was from Champaran. And when I was in Champaran, where Gandhi was tried for entry, and then they started the Satyagraha to not grow indigo, which was being grown under slave conditions. Actually, the birthplace is Champaran. Then his father got posted in different places, so he also went to Burma. But coming back to the disasters of 84, where does this come from? Why are the Punjab farmers angry? What are these things called pesticides that are killing people in Bhopal? So I studied the roots of all of this. I studied how, actually, I noticed you have wonderful book displays there, because you have one even nicer seed displays. But the Agricultural Testament by Harvard is available in a low-cost volume. It should just be spread everywhere and converted into every Indian languages because it is Indian agriculture. I grew up on my mother's farm, but growing up on the farm, you don't have, the kind of articulation that Harvard had in Agriculture Testament. And we found one last copy torn and ruined in the agriculture library in the agriculture ministry. And that's how it was first reproduced. And after that, it's been reproduced in many places. But Harvard was sent to India in 1905. To improve Indian agriculture. That's another part of colonialism, that since we are primitive, we must always be improved. But because he was a good scientist, when he arrived in Pusa, he found the soils are fertile. So there's so many insects, but no pest damage. And as he writes, I decided I could do no better than turn the pest and the peasant into my professor. And he wrote Agriculture Testament as really a testament of how Indian farming had sustained itself for about 10,000 years. And the two principles he articulates very powerfully are principles that I, anyway, had learned from the Chipko movement. I worked as a volunteer for the Chipko movement through my university days in Canada. I'd come back for every holiday. Nature never works in monocultures. Nature always has diversity of expression. In a forest, but farming like nature also has diversity of crops. And that's why not only did we have diversity of crops, saw the pigeon peas in display. But as Dr. Risharia taught me, Indian tribal peasants evolved 200,000 rice varieties. And that's what he taught me. He said, respect the peasants. They're the breeders. The dal varieties, but not just as varieties to be grown separately. Mixed cropping was the pattern. He says, in Indian farming, you never find monocultures. You always find mixtures. And the second, nature always works through recycling. Every time you sign, you put mulch. And that's what a forest does, constantly mulching. Every leaf goes right back to the soil from which it came and is creating future soil and future fertility and future water and future everything. When I studied the industrial agriculture, the Green Revolution, when I studied Punjab, I realized, it was about monocultures. You can drive through Punjab in the wheat season and you'll only find wheat. And you drive through in the rice season and you'll only see rice. There's no other crop. Farmers of Punjab can't recognize a dal today. When they come to the Navanirman farm, and I hope some of you will sometime also visit us, they said, urad dal aisi dikhti hai. Tur dal, we don't call it tur, we call it arhar. Arhar aisi dikhti hai. Their entire knowledge, but it's not just their knowledge of these dals has been eating. They're not growing it and they're not eating it. West UP, which used to be such a rich agricultural area, in fact, the first freedom movement started from Meerut, 1857. Every crop they used to grow. Every member of the community grew their cotton and had the charkha and the loom in every house. Today, if you go, they're all growing sugarcane, only sugarcane, and a little bit of wheat in the Rabi season. And what are they eating on a daily basis? Roti and aloo ki sabji. These are people who've been strong and hardworking, but I watch them. I say, with this kind of diet, how long will you be able to work? But worse, their roti itself is now nutritionally empty. New research, and let me just share this with you, because we've just done some new research with the seed saving. So we just took arbitrarily, because, the Navanirman community seed banks are all over, including Vijay Jardhari, who came, he was among the early community seed banks we started. Different places, there are more than 150 that we started, but where the rice areas have saved seed, we took some. We said, just send whatever you want to. And then we tested them for their nutrition. We ourselves didn't measure protein, etc., but the calcium, the iron, the manganese, zinc, the difference between the average of the indigenous rices and basically, where do you find, all the PDS is the so-called Green Revolution modern varieties. That's what's distributed, where the people buy in local markets. We picked up the PDS rice and local market rice. The difference in calcium is 146% between the native seeds and the modern varieties that are supposed to be high yielding. Iron, 135%. Manganese, 169%. Zinc, 80%. It's no wonder you have iron deficiency and you have manganese deficiency and calcium deficiency, zinc deficiency. And then what you do, instead of having the diversity, that will give you the nutrition, not just in the seed diversity, but also in the soil. Let me just share you our data on the soil. We did a comparison of chemical farms in our valley, in Doon Valley, and the organic farms that have farmed for 20 years, and chemical farms that have been using chemicals for 20 years. And this is the difference. So organic matter, of course, went down in chemical farms because they return nothing. There's no law of return or recycling. It was minus 14%. And in the organic farms, plus 99%. And I'm sure if you did a study here at the Aranya farm, it's building. Just look at the leaves, they're building soil and nutrition everywhere. But the one that I love is nitrogen, because there is this illusion that the soil is an empty container for putting nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. That's all that the plant needs. And when you put synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, you are going to have more nitrogen in the soil and in the plants. The total nitrogen in the chemical farms in the soil is minus 22%. The more external nitrogen you apply, the less nitrogen you have. And I'll tell you a little more about how the plants also get less nitrogen. And the total nitrogen in organic farms, without applying urea, where the soil organisms do the work, is up 100%. Phosphorus, up 63%. Potassium, up 84%. You don't need the NPK. The soil web produces it for itself, and it produces it in usable form. The synthetic is not usable. Zinc is minus 37%, and it's up 14%. I had a public health doctor visit us at Navdanya, and she saw this data, and she says, now I get it. Because she does public health, and for a lot of the diseases, what she does also analyzes the brain chemistry. What are the deficiencies that are triggering the disease? And she found 50% of teenagers of Australia were depressed. And all of them had zinc deficiency. But she couldn't understand where the zinc deficiency is coming from till she saw this table. So it's coming from the crops you are growing, because your seeds have been depleted of nutrition, and it's growing from the method of how you grow it chemically, which is actually a way of taking nutrition out of your food. Manganese, up 14%, down 17%. So in effect, industrial agriculture is a hugely costly way to produce commodities with huge external inputs, most of them fossil fuel based. The process itself is fossil fuel based. But, I think not in this area, but we work in Vidarbha, where the highest number of suicides are because the highest amount of BT cotton bred there. And the last time I went, there were these trucks that come with cars, and they were coming with tractors, and there was a 100-acre field, which was just parking tractors for farmers to get them on credit. The same treadmill which pushed them into the suicides because of the borrowing for the BT cotton seed. Now the solution is to make it worse by now tractorize. Fossil fuel use comes from the machines, but it comes from the chemical. Every chemical in agriculture is a fossil fuel chemical. Fertilizers, pesticides, the raw material for all of them. And the part, these days, industry is really after the cows. I don't know how many of you noticed. Cows burp. Suddenly the cows burp. And no one is talking. Like they're saying, because of animals, 1/3 farms of Netherlands must shut down. But they're not looking at the fertilizer. And they're not looking at the countries which are using the most fertilizer. And they're not looking at the companies that are making the fertilizers that are pushing. Mr. Bill Gates, as you might have noticed, I'm very fond of him. And I wrote a book, Oneness versus 1%, to figure out how did this billionaire become the government we never elected? How's he governing us? In every field, whether it's health or education. And our government has handed over our food and nutrition to him. There's a program called Poshan in the Women and Child Welfare Ministry. It's being run by Bill Gates. So is Mr. Gates going to come and tell you how to make a good rasam? No, he'll find new ways to say it's very dangerous for you. Because, having lived as long as I have, I'm fascinated with how everything that is not just positive but necessary is criminalized. It began with the attempt to criminalize farmers for saving seeds. That's why I started Navdanya. I said, absolutely not. Saving seeds is our duty. And letting the diversity of seeds flourish is our duty. I'd seen what the Green Revolution. I said, what's going to happen when every seed is genetically modified in the hands of 5 companies? Because that's what they said, the meeting in 1987, which is what led me to start Navdanya. And eventually, when I realized I couldn't walk everywhere, there's a limit to how much I can walk. And the limit is kind of shrinking a bit, you noticed, with age. But, at a certain point, I said, the The pressures of globalization are so fast. And just my walking in a few villages. So I said, no, we must have an organization and a movement, and there must be more people. That's when I formally started Navanirman. But I started seed saving in 87. So our seeds were called primitive, and I shared you the data. All traditional crops have higher nutrition than all the so-called modern varieties. All. It's just that they didn't look. And there's this unscientific methodology of not looking. It's don't look, don't find, and just declare. These seeds are primitive. So in the early days, when I would go to the villages and, especially the ragi and we call it mandua in our area and the jagoda and all, the way I did it was I took books from my parents' library, and they used to have very nice woodcuts. I didn't know the crops of this land. But I'd go in the village with this and say, do you have this? And the men would say, no, we grow only potato. Because they deal with the market. No, we only grow soya bean. In the village, the women would say, no, of course we grow it. And the reason we can carry 40 kilos and the men can't, they're eating white rice. And they think it's superior. So I took a pledge then, because the women educated me about the millets. We did many books on the food and biodiversity heritage of India, on pulses, on oil seeds, on millets, on spices. Our book on the millets, we called it Forgotten Foods. We took a commitment that we are going to make these forgotten foods the future food. And it shows that when you work together with commitment, things that have been declared obsolete, out of fashion, the past can actually become the future, just as much as the kind of agriculture that is being practiced here. This is not the agriculture, the forgotten agriculture of the past. It's the agriculture that has to be remembered for the future. I mentioned you declared local seeds primitive and wiped them out, and then put inferior seeds, and had guts to say, and we have higher yield. Yield of what? As a scientist, I always say you must make a complete sentence. Yield is incomplete. It doesn't describe anything to you. Yield should say yield of this grown in this way. That's the complete description. But yield measured just by the weight of something that goes to the market, doesn't tell you what happened to the land and how you treated it. It doesn't tell you whether the farmer was left indebted with the high costs of inputs. It doesn't tell you that the people eating this stuff are getting sick. And it doesn't tell you that it's not even being eaten. It's going for biofuel and animal feed. 75% corn in India, the hybrid corn of Monsanto, is going for, we've done a study on this, it's going for animal feed. So they keep saying, we feed the world, we have higher yields. Not only are they starving the world because they're diverting food to other uses, but what the commodities being produced are nutritionally empty. Nutritionally empty stuff doesn't feed you because you need nourishment. But even more importantly, it is toxic. It's making you sick. They're not feeding the world, they're making the world sick, the planet and people. And the same process, I'm writing a new book on climate change and the future of food. And it's quite miraculous. A few years ago, I realized, for me, saving seeds was pure and simple and absolute. It needed to be done. People say, why? It had to be done. The why was you cannot let 5 companies monopolize seed and make it illegal for you to save seed. How can our foundational duties and our foundational culture be criminalized? And then realize, because, when the farmers, we had to encourage farmers to grow, but they had been told, and it is true, that with the chemical package, it doesn't do well. So we said, do organic. And the farmers, I think it took about 10 years later, they come to me and say, okay, now we've grown all this diversity, you've got to help us market. I said, that's the thing I don't know anything about. I taught myself about seeds, I taught myself agriculture, but frankly, marketing doesn't excite me. So I'd load our Jeep with grains from the farmers, take it to Delhi, make the farmers hold classes of how to cook millets in Delhi. And then, my friends my age would say, well, we are happy to make a chapati of ragi, but the children want pizza. So we said, okay, we'll figure out how to make ragi pizza. It's so fashionable now. You see, there's dosas of ragi and there's biscuits of our hottest selling item in the farmers' shops is ragi biscuits. People love it. Tasty. Ragi on its own brings a chocolatey taste. So colonialism tries to label everything that gives us freedom as if it's primitive, so that we slip into slavery and dependency. And when I would say to people, why don't you eat more millets? And they'd always say, kala hai. They want a fair and lovely for the ragi. So we did a festival, Black is Beautiful, in Delhi. We used to have, in those days, have a stall in Delhi Hat, Black is Beautiful. Because with this colonialism grew a racism around food. I mean, I just had lovely passion fruit juice of gur. But again, gur is kala. White sugar is white. Gobar is kala. Urea is white. I've seen in England advertisements for urea in the 30s, 40s when they were introducing it. The advertisements saying, basically all fertility came from cow dung and other things. They said, look at this black, dirty stuff and look at this pure white crystals. Salt, same. Refined flour, oils. We did a sarso satyagrah because in 98 the companies worked out to ban Indian edible oils so that they could dump soya and later palm oil. And before that, they had spent about 20 years attacking all our indigenous oils and called all kinds of paid papers in health journals. Coconut will kill you, mustard will kill you. So we did the satyagrah because the women from the slums called me and said, you talk about food, our children aren't eating food cooked in soya. Bring the mustard back. I said, let me do a study. What happened? When I did the study, wrote a little booklet, we did a satyagrah in the heart of Delhi. These days you all go to Jantar Mantar, but those days we could be in Connaught Place. And we dumped soya. Then I called the chief minister of Delhi. Different days. Try this today. So I called the chief minister to receive the first bottle of the satyagrah oil. It was illegal. It had been made illegal. So we grew our own mustard. The farmers grew mustard, and we got a little mill. We made the oil and packed it for him and said, here's the first satyagrah bottle. It allowed cold pressed oil to come back. Now every company, including Fortune and everyone, would be selling the junk, but they also have kachi ghani ka tel. That order is still on paper, but that one act of ours brought back the healthier oil. Sadly, the chief minister did lose his job for accepting this, because what were we taking on? We were taking on the Monsantos and the Cargills. They're constantly watching to see who in the public system is giving support. Now, they can't fire every farmer. They're trying, of course, indirectly through the economic crimes. Political system, getting screened out. Anyone who is aligned somehow to ecological issues, to farmers' issues, to issues of the working people. So I challenged the idea of yield right in the beginning, and I evolved a category called biodiversity-based productivity. Productivity basically, technically, is the measured ratio of output per unit input. Quite simply, if your input is higher, your output is lower, it's a negative productivity. Industrial agriculture is a negative productivity system. Part of that negative productivity is the fact that it's using so many resources and so much energy, 10 times more energy than it produces as food, 10 times more finances than what the farmer earns. And everything is negative. But that additional energy that's being put in is what we in physics, is what leads to entropy, wasted energy, the pollution. That's the root of the climate crisis. Because all living systems have the power to work with their own energy. Every plant around us grew from a seed or a cutting. Nasima is not standing there and saying, now leaf, grow. And now leaf, shed. They don't have instruction from anyone outside. It's being described as self-organized autopoietic system. Poiesis is poetry. Autopoiesis is that which writes its own poetry. And life writes its own poetry. Anytime you say, no, we will substitute this with an external input that's fossil fuel or fossil chemical based, you've already prepared the ground of having pollution, and as a result of it, the emissions, the result of which is climate havoc. I wrote a book called Soil Not Oil, and I said, I'm not going to use the term climate change because there are too many people who are being paid to write, oh, this is wonderful because now we will be able to swim in the Baltic Sea in Sweden in the winter. And I said, no, that's not how it happens. It's not that everything changes evenly and predictably. Changes with havoc. You don't know when your rain will come. It's increasingly in India, I find, coming at harvest time, not at sowing time. And I don't think the earth is deciding this. There's actually a phenomenon called geoengineering. And Mr. Gates is actually practicing this and offered it as a big solution. And then the second thing he offered was more genetic engineering, pretending that genetic engineering would give climate resilient crops. But all he was doing was stealing it. Because our farmers have already bred climate resilience. Salt tolerant seed, flood tolerant seeds, drought tolerant seed. And, his advertisements were, we invented the flood tolerant. We gave it a name subgene. There's no one gene of complex climate phenomena. It's multi-genetic trait. Many genes act together. Wherever I've given talks and then there's been a question and answer, or there's been a panel, if the Gates Foundation is there and they will always cite this inventing flood-tolerant gene, I said, tell me the parents. They never give an answer to that. They say, oh, we really respect your work, Dr. Shiva. I said, I didn't ask that. Tell me where you stole that right. And they never reply. They have never replied. So they just steal climate resilient seeds that our farmers have bred. So geoengineering, genetic engineering, and the latest, of course, is fake food. First they said, no, it doesn't know how to create a fertility. The forest doesn't know how to create a fertility. We need urea. And then they said, "Now farmers don't know how to breed seed and make seed. We have to do genetic engineering." So, I said, okay, the first one, they said, the earth is empty, it has nothing. It's our nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. For seed, the idea of patenting, I called it the idea of bio-nullius, the empty life. And in the court cases I have had to deal with Monsanto, they actually in the court say the seed is empty. It's the chemicals we put into it that make it a Superman and make it work. Seed is empty. There is no life in seed. We invent life. And in fact, a patent on seed is a declaration I invented life. And at that meeting of 1987, when they said, we will do GMOs in order to take patents on seed, I said, so now they want GMOs to basically a message, God, move over. We are the creators. We are the creators of life. And I'm not saying this trivially as an indirect understanding. Every time there's been piracy, and we've fought piracy of neem, of basmati, of wheat. In the case of basmati, we went to Munich to challenge the neem patent. We fought 11 years and we defeated the US government and a big chemical company. 11 years. I went to Geneva and started to talk to the ambassadors there. And I went to the US ambassador. I said, you eat basmati. And he said, now you're saying it's invented by you? You know what he said? And I said, how can you allow these stupid things to happen? You know what he said to me? Dr. Shiva, we have nothing left because they've outsourced everything. Everything is being made in China. All we have is intellectual property. And then he said, for us, our future is redefining life as a manufacture, for which we can collect royalties through intellectual property. And our work is to remember that life is creativity, self-organized, biodiversity, Prakriti, the first action, and farming with that richness of biodiversity is the true culture of farming. And eating food from that rich system of biodiversity is the real culture of food. And this will become even more important with the whole lab food, fake food issue. One of the big items that made big news was Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat. Both of them have Mr. Gates' investments. Both of them have patents, 14 patents. For every element that's synthetic, and everything is synthetic. And I've never understood why would people want to eat GM soya burger with fake blood? Why would you want to eat blood? There's so much diversity on this planet. Why do you want to eat a beef burger that's not a beef burger? Why would you want to drink milk that's not milk? You don't want something, avoid it. So many of us, we get allergies, we avoid that bit of food. You have allergy to animal products, then forget it. But don't support the next ripoff, because fake food is the next ripoff. And it's moving very, very, very fast. The actual companies are failing, Impossible Burger is failing. They're having to lay off huge. There's 2 Indians sitting in Silicon Valley who are doing dairy, and they call it cow-free dairy. Similarly, for fake fish, fish-free fish. This is ontological confusion of the most basic kinds, where even the world in which you live, you don't understand it anymore. You don't know truth anymore. You don't know reality anymore. And you definitely have no idea, because you've kind of made your brain genetically engineerable. Because others are fixing the messaging for you. And you're not thinking for yourself, because you're not thinking through the system. I've told young people, they'll always ask me, do you drink milk? I say, I love it. I love yogurt. I grew up with cows. And our mother always treated the calves as the first people. We were the second-class citizens in our home. And that's the case for rural India, You have to give more love to the calf and the cow. And, the Ayurvedic doctors have told me that the domesticated cow has been evolved to have food for more than the calf, that they will fall sick if you don't milk them. And all this is being forgotten. But when thinking now is reaching the stage where, the Gateses of the world are saying we've got to exterminate every cow. 2 million cows in Ireland marked to be killed for a net zero. And I say, okay, you don't like the milking of a cow, but you're fine to kill cows on a very large scale. I said, how is extermination compassion? I wasn't here for Sneha talking about food for all beings. Because food is for all beings. Food is not just for humans. Not only food for all beings, food comes from all beings. That's what I've learned in all these 40 years. We eat because of the earthworms and the mycorrhizae. We eat because of the birds and the pollinators. We eat because the others are giving us food. And when we grow food, we must have them all in mind. The way we grow food, it must be food for all. Not just for all humans, but food for all beings. So there are 2 systems, 2 cultures of food and farming, where we have the choice of which way will we go as individuals, as communities, as cultures. Of permanent agriculture, the culture of ecological agriculture, the culture of healthy eating, recognizes that we are part of nature. We are not separate from nature. That we are not superior to other species, the disease of anthropocentrism, putting humans at the center of the universe. Nature, her soil, her seeds, her plants and animals are all living, every element. All living beings are sentient and self-organized and interconnected. Symbiosis, living together in mutuality and harmony, is the law of nature. Just think of it. When we take care of the soil, we don't abuse the soil. Part of it we let the leaves, part of it we do a bit of composting, mulching. We are giving food to the soil, food web, which is the richest biodiverse system. We're feeding the soil diversity. And then they feed, and they feed them. So new research is showing the mycorrhizal fungi has increased by 3,600%. That much more population there is. Now, this fungi knows where to go and pick up a nutrient that the plant needs, but it doesn't give too much. They both know how much to give and how much to take. Research is now finding that, like I said, the seed can be bred for more nutrition. The soil, when we give back, has more nutrition. But when we have more organisms in the soil, they have the power to bring that rich nutrition to the plant. And when we eat that plant, that's how we have more nutrition. That's how nutrition has disappeared from the food. In the West, it's about 70 to 80% nutrition gone. I met a wonderful scientist from Italy who does study. He says the one old variety of apricot is equal to 45 new apricots, big in size, weighing a lot, calculations on how many carrots you must eat. So we are basically producing nutritionally empty, toxic commodities. We're not producing food. I call it an anti-food system. Because food, as our old Upanishads say, everything is food, everything is something else is food. Because food is the cycle, food is the currency. And working together, the symbiosis between the mycorrhizal fungi and the plant is not just the key to food and nutrition, it's the key to the solution to the climate. Our work is showing about, when I did my book, Soil Not Oil, I said about 45% emissions come from a food system that's industrialized and globalized. Now about 54% actually. The production, the invading of forests for commodities like palm oil and soybean, the food miles. Why should our dals not be coming from India and instead be glyphosate sprayed, fake dal from Canada? So much of the food in the market is a yellow pea that they sell to. And I got a student who did a PhD under me in Canada. I said, look at glyphosate in the dal that you're exporting. Loaded. It's a cancer drug. So the issue of symbiosis is not just the key to how nature works. The issue of symbiosis is the way we have to make the food system work. Every few months for elections, we have this free distribution of food. But a public policy on food should be, I'm going to buy from the farmers at a fair price, food that's organic, foods that's nutritious, foods that are diverse, and make sure every child, the poorest child, gets that food. And that's where public money will be used. Then you are creating a symbiotic food system. Otherwise, you're just getting votes. Diversity, of course, is the key principle. And the law of return, the law of recycling. And I am increasing, we were made to think in terms of boxes. We were made to think that economy is about money. And I'm realizing the word currency didn't even mean money earlier. Currency meant the water flow, the nutrition flow. It meant the flow of life. Currency was made money with colonialism, with Mr. Locke. Before that, it wasn't associated with money. It was flow of life. Beautiful Greek word, pantareia. Everything flows. Nothing is static. Everything flowing all the time. And keeping those flows going is the good work we must do. Because we don't create, we don't engineer life, but we remove the obstacles that are blocking the flow. I'm realizing that the biggest economy is the economy of care and compassion. Care for the earth, care for each other. Being alive with other living beings calls for reverence and respect for others, the duty to do no harm, the duty to care. Now, of course, this culture is very different from the dominant culture, which assumes we are separate from nature, nature is dead, everything is disconnected, the soil is not connected to the plant is not connected to our gut microbiome. We can mess up our food system and still stay healthy. No, the gut microbiome is totally dependent on our food system, and our food system is dependent on the biodiversity of plants and the biodiversity of soil. Just in the last 10 years, scientists are realizing that everything Ayurveda, indigenous agriculture taught us about food gets verified because of the role of the gut microbiome, because 100 trillion microbes in our gut, each has a different diet. They want different things. And if you only give one food, because all processed food is same raw materials processed into different, you're either starving them or with toxics, you're killing them. And this mechanistic worldview and the industrial viewpoint, beginning with its values and worldviews, and going on to the science structures of emptiness and the technologies of extraction. So we have to change are thinking of science from mechanistic science, holistic science of relationships. How do things relate to each other? Because that's where life is. Life is in relationships. And understanding relationships is absolutely vital. Technology is a tool of transformation. Nature transforms. Nature has her technology. And this much I've learned, that the biggest technology for health and the biggest technology as a solution to climate change is working with nature, working with photosynthesis, working with biodiversity, working with all living beings in their creativity, with compassion and care. And that culture actually makes us better off even in the narrow financial system. Our farmers have an economy that's bringing them 10 times more because it's not hemorrhaging for costly seeds and costly chemicals and debt. Every bit is there for a useful, real use in the family. So very, very happy to have been able to join this convergence. I'm hoping that by next year, on World Food Day, which is 16th of October, around that time, we'll do a convergence at Navanirman. And on the future of food and farming, sharing all the amazing work people are doing. And often I'm talking a bit about the destruction that we must stop, but really celebrating together our creative power to make change. Thank you.
I'm Vijita. My only concern is the future. How about the children?
Well, you are here. I mean, we call our little beach Vidyapeeth the Earth University. Because in my view, any place where you can learn is a university. And we have to start recognizing that our biggest teacher is nature herself. But when you say, oh, we are too busy, isn't it true that at the end of the day, whatever running around you do is किसी तरह रोटी आए? और अगर रोटी ही poison है तुम्हारे भागने में, तो क्या मिला? And that is why attention to what you're eating, then realizing that you have to create the systems that ensure your child and other children have the good food one has to learn today. In the this crazy world where high cost production produces cheap food, high yields is low yield, double speak at every level. That's why I think for us to not imagine that if for 50, 60 years the false narrative of the Green Revolution is being repeated, there are so many avenues to learn. And to imagine that at this point of history, governments who are being totally controlled by I told you, Bill Gates is controlling our education. And when I stopped this with a campaign, I think it was just before COVID, Food and Safety Authority signed a contract for Alexa to teach nutrition to kids. And I wrote a piece and we launched a campaign. Amma, not Alexa. Amma and grandmother will teach us what is good eating. So at this point, don't say, oh, Alexa will teach us. You learn and then you teach him and let him become a teacher. Because I might learn faster than you.
Now, how I'm saying this is farmers are selling the land and other people, the rich people are buying the land. As you mentioned, the richest people in the world are owning most of the farmland right now, right? So, me as an individual, what can I do?
Why are farmers selling land? Because they're indebted. Why are they indebted? Because of chemical inputs. And being locked into long-distance supply chains where what the farmers earn constantly collapses. We've done a study that shows that 5% of what the consumer pays reaches the farmer in long-distance supply chains. So the farmer's earning nothing, less and less, nothing for milk. I mean, every second day you have a protest, Nothing is going to the farmer, but everything is going out of the farmer's pocket. And if there is no Padma and Narsima in their neighborhood, they will sell the land because there's nothing showing them the way. And they think for a little while they will manage with that money. But it's not just the case that the farmers are selling the land. If you look at newspapers in India, at least for the Delhi newspapers, I can see 4 or 5 pages on land acquisition for highways. I mean, today when I was coming here, I don't know how big and cancerous Hyderabad has become. Now those builders got that land. The government buys it and then sells it to them, And then they sell it very expensive. We did a big volume on the land, Great Land Grab, Great Indian Land Grab. Government takes it by force. Then it sells it not very expensive to the developer or builder, whoever it is. And then when they sell it on, it's by speculation. Thousands of % more. And land grab is the biggest economic activity. Of course, it's very schizophrenic because the very people who are telling the farmers, forget food, forget land, it doesn't matter, just learn code. Learn code. Aren't we being told that? Learn code and you'll be delivered. But they know the real thing that matters is food and land. 2008, when the big financial collapse happened, banks were announcing They're the only secure things. Invest in land and invest in food. For them, investment in food means speculate on food and make it costly. Speculate in land, make it costly. So to your question, for farmers who have land, hang on to it. Find a group that can teach you how to farm without losing the land. So we only look at the farming end and don't look at the eating end. But the two are deeply connected. And in our minds, we must constantly connect it. Doctors I know are giving up practices in New York and Milan and realizing I can't treat cancer without changing the food system. And they're becoming farmers. We need more and more places like this. And if you can't mobilize the resources individually, do it collectively. Find a farmer with whom you can co-invest. This is the time to be a little more creative. Don't follow the investment patterns for the quick make money and run. Make it for the permanence, I have come to the conclusion we don't produce food. We care for the earth and make her beautiful, and she gives us food.
Good evening. I'm Reshma. I'm a researcher and a physicist as well. My question to you is the science that native seeds are powerful is clearly evident, but despite that, there is heavy funding that is going into GM research. And why are we not making any policy level changes to track this funding or even regulate this funding?
And that meeting with industry talked about making genetically engineered organisms in order to take patents. It was for me very clear that this for them is about money. But money and profits at the cost of destroying the freedom of the farmers from whom you took the seed in the first place. In Hyderabad, you have ICRISAT. Every scientist of ICRISAT who worked with farmers has been removed. Every scientist. ICRISAT is now really run by Mr. Gates. He was going to create a whole seed. No. Svalbard is up there. Here in Andhra, he was going to have a giant-sized seed production system. And we complained about it. That bit got knocked out, So when you say why, at that point, the government of India realized there's something called sovereignty. At this point, we are in a very interesting position. We've forgotten sovereignty and we've replaced it with a toxic nationalism. Our work has to be on deep sovereignty, and sovereignty is not about the ruler. Sovereignty is about the freedom of the last life form. The earthworm has sovereignty. That bamboo has sovereignty. This farm has sovereignty. A village has sovereignty. A region has sovereignty. Sovereignty is self-rule and self-organization. Swaraj. That's what it means. That's what we need to build and strengthen. And it will grow like everything free and living grows, from the soil upwards.
The cow-free dairy and fish-free fish. But the kind of things we get in urban and semi-urban areas, which is like homogenized, pasteurized, do you think that is not monoculture?
Yeah, I wasn't talking about monoculture in the context of cows. I was talking in monocultures in the context of our worldview and monoculture of crops. India still has a lot of diversity of livestock. We are the source of all livestock breeds. So if you go to Gujarat, you'll have different livestock. If you go to Rajasthan, you have different livestock. So in that deep sense of what a monoculture is, the erosion of genetic diversity, not the case. As far as what they're fed is concerned, of course, what animals are being fed is intensive feed and grain, which is not their diet. In fact, the whole issue of when you eat only dal, if you eat lots and lots of dal, you get gas, don't you? So the burping problem is really related to giving the cows beans rather than herbs. They're herbivores, they're meant to eat. So I was talking about it in the context of the absurdity of wanting to exterminate. I was talking about that, yeah? So that's what the issue is. The solution to a messed up food system is not kill the last farmer and kill the last cow. The slogan for future farming is farming without farmers, food without farms. That's the slogan. It's both Mr. Gates as well as every journalist who gets write-ups from him to write as if they're writing themselves. Now that is the crisis. And why is that a crisis? An ecological crisis. Like I said, everything is food. So you can't live outside the food system. It's a pretense. When they created synthetic fertilizers, you know what the slogan was of Haber-Bosch? We'll grow food from air. Did they grow food from air? No. They took more land because synthetic fertilizer needs more monocultures. Monocultures need more land. Biodiverse systems and mixed cultures need less land. It's called the land equivalence ratio, less land. So you need more land. Now they're saying, all this, we won't have to farm because it is true. 50% farming in industrial food is responsible for emission. But not all farming is. Good farming, which heals the cycle, increases photosynthesis, increases biodiversity. If those three elements are there, in 10 years, 10% farms of the world could be a solution to the climate change. That 1.5% increase target they talk about. The amount, 1/3 of the emissions today are being stocked in the mycorrhizal fungi. The power of the living system is what was ignored because arrogantly we basically declared nature is dead. And yes, you're right, things are changing. But we would be foolish to let them change in a direction where we become sicker and sicker and sicker because ultra-processed food is the single biggest cause for sickness today. Lab food is ultra-processed food because the synthetic elements in processed food that are a big part of the problem. And if these synthetic elements, if everything is synthetic elements, none of which tested. I was just seeing in one of these milks, the lab milk, there are 82 chemicals that have been used that have never been tested for eating. So it's one large giant experiment at a time where we know food is a determinant of health. So nothing about health is talked about in these ultra-processed food from the lab. It's all being offered in the name of climate change, which is where it is scientifically a fraud. Because new research is showing, just like, animals in factory farms actually need more feed. And therefore they need more land, even though the argument was it'll need less because they're in a prison. And they measured the acreage of the prison rather than the acreage of the field. So the feedstock is what matters. 5 times more feedstock for lab food. And even more serious, 25 times higher emissions from lab food that pretends to be a solution to climate change. Mr. Gates is even funding something called biomilk. Biomilk is mother's breast milk, but not from a mother, from a lab. And he's saying this will solve climate change. I said, well, mother is here, the baby's here, no food miles, no emissions. And here he wants a huge energy-intensive processing to be shipped around the world to every mother and say it's a solution. So, to me, what's absurd about our times is nonsense can be spoken. And part of our work is to be that little boy in the Hans Christian story, but the emperor has no clothes.
What can people do that can actually help with regards to, because he also controls most media as investment states. What can people actually do to address this?
Know your food, eat with knowledge, and become of a different part of a different food system, and realize that it's not the big media which he controls that brings us the knowledge. Every time you're eating in a healthy way, your soil is connecting with your body. My friend Eric Seralini, who did this amazing research on the GMOs, he's done new research with comparing fresh organic food and industrial food and what happens to the cells in the gut. And in the one place, it's like a harmony being played because they're talking to each other. There's communication going on. And in the other case, it's disharmony. That's why we get disease. So you all are here for 3 days. You're communicating. This didn't depend on Gates. So part of the monoculture of the mind that I have talked about is making us forget that the dominant system of control is not the only system. Yeah? In knowledges, there's a beautiful desk publishing indigenous knowledge. We repeatedly told mechanistic reductionism was the only science. I threw that out when I did quantum theory. But since then, whether it's green revolution or GMO or climate change, it's basically always not accepting mechanistic reductionism as explanation for complex living systems. So live knowingly.
Madam, one last question. I'm a very simple marginal farmer. What one advice would you like to give to me?
Come here and learn.
Already learned.
And if you haven't, if you've already learned, then teach 10 other farmers. But if you get rid of chemicals in your farm and work with biodiversity and systems of recycling in any way you want, and second, break out of the extractive system of supply chains and link to people who need healthy food. Join with 10 other farmers and join with 50 people in Hyderabad and create the other economy.
नमस्ते मैम, अस्मिता। मेरा एक ही सवाल है कि गवर्नमेंट ग्रीन क्रेडिट्स इंट्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं। What is the effect of green credits on future food?
Adding green to any word doesn't change that word, right? When they made it the green revolution and it was industrial farming, it didn't stop industrial farming from being industrial. It didn't make it green. It actually made it very bloody, which is what I studied. Credit is a system to get anyone dependent on debt. And when you take a living system like the living earth with amazing powers to give you solutions to problems that the industrial greed economy has created for you, you don't really need credit from that same system, which never gives a rupee without wanting 10 rupees back. So let me just quickly mention how I see the tricks being played on the financial side. The World Bank, IMF got us into debt. Then they put structural adjustment using that debt. So you don't know how to govern yourselves. Then they started to privatize what people have. What's happening now is, as many of you will have noticed, there's a taking away of whatever people have. It could be the land farmers have, homes. I mean, the crisis in America on homes, and they call them de-housed, unhoused people, the ones who've been made homeless, because homes are now in the hands of BlackRock, who's speculating so hard. What will happen with, for example, carbon credits is one aspect of green credits. And Mr. Gates has articulated this in his book, How to Deal with Climate Catastrophe. He's saying, this net zero issue doesn't mean we stop polluting. We'll keep polluting. I'll keep flying my private jet. But we must look for sinks and offsets. So what's going to happen if we allow this to happen across the board is farmers will be told, oh, you're in debt. And so, having to deal with this in our organic movement. Farmers' incomes are collapsing, they're in debt, and they're being told, sell your carbon credit, get money through the carbon credit. But the problem is the same system that took the most important activity, which is growing food and nourishment for people, and made it a losing enterprise. What guarantees is there that 5 years later, this carbon financing will not leave people high and dry? That's first. The second most serious thing is the debts that are already there and the new debts that will be created by this will then be used for the economy they're thinking actually before the Stockholm summit. Rockefeller designed new natural asset companies. And what is the work of the new natural asset companies? To take nature and put it on Wall Street. So the green leaf and its photosynthesis is traded on Wall Street through speculation. The water tank and the water in it is traded in Wall Street. And through this, you can't multiply. Trading on Wall Street doesn't multiply the water, but it multiplies the finances. You know what they're talking about as their economy? $4,000 trillion economy of financial assets while nature dries up. So it is right now an ontological question of, who are we? What are we here for? What is nature? What do we need? These basic questions are vital because right now, big money is finding every trick to take what little remains in poor people's hands, transfer it to themselves, and then put it on the financial world. It means it's not that there won't be land, it'll be in their hands. And there'll be huge multiplication of the financial system, just like we've seen it multiply right now. And that's why, just hold on to anything real that you have. If you have a small farm, protect it. If you have a community, defend it and love it. If you have a family, appreciate it. If you have a child, go hug them.